welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials, where I discuss true crime and trials. My name's Lindsay and the next video is the next in the Robert Durst trial, and the next witness is Peter Schwartz. Now this is a video recorded testimony and he is a psychotherapist. And in the early 1980s he was the owner of a retail photography shop in Connecticut. He has seen the Jinx, but doesn't remember if he's seen the movie All Good Things. He has also read various media about Bob and also the disappearance of Kathy, but he will try his best to give his own personal observations and not what he's seen, heard or read. So he knew Gilberta, and this is the friend of Kathy's, and he had known her since around 1974. He had also been in the presence of Kathy a couple of times, but didn't actually know her. He and Gilberta would be at parties at the same time and would do things together, sometimes along with Peter's girlfriend. But there was maybe once or twice where it was just him and Gilberta. He says when he was at these parties, he didn't really have any interactions with Kathy, and he only probably saw her maybe twice. He doesn't recall having any specific conversations. He was aware of Kathy's divorce, but only through Gilberta. He didn't really know Bob. Again, he had been in his presence, but had never had conversations with him, and this was also around 2 times. The first time he met Bob was at a party at Gilberta's apartment, and he can't remember the specific date. So he tells her what happened that night, and he says the door suddenly went flying and hit him in the head. And he says the only person that was standing near that door was Bob. And he wasn't doing anything other than standing there and observing the party. He didn't actually see who opened the door, but he believes it was Bob because no one else was moving by the door and he was standing there. He was right next to the door. After what happened, Peter says Bob just stood there and appeared as if nothing had happened. Bob didn't say anything and he didn't apologise. He says that Bob showed no concern that Peter was injured. He just stood there like nothing had happened at all. Does this sound like Bob to you guys? Because it sure sounds like Bob to me. When asked about what Bob's expression was, he says it was morose, unconcerned to the point of he couldn't care less as to what might have happened. So the next time he saw Bob was at a party at Bob and Kathy's apartment in New York, and it was Gilberta that invited Peter and his girlfriend at the time. This was the night that they also went to the club. So there were 2 groups of them. One group Bob was in and the other was Kathy, Peter and his girlfriend and a few others. The group that Peter was in with Kathy decided they didn't want to go, and it was Kathy that wanted to go back to the apartment. So Bob had gone off to the nightclub and the other group had gone back to the apartment. At some point Bob came back, maybe about 20 minutes later, and Peter says Bob was agitated and very angry. I think we can all guess what's coming next. Then he says Bob came in the room, looked at Kathy, then he looked over at Peter and said, "Well, you're the only man here, or the only guy here," something like that. And it was said in a threatening way, and he says Bob looked enraged. Then Bob rushed forward and kicked Peter in the eye, fracturing it. And because Peter was sat on the floor, he didn't have a chance to get up and defend himself. And Peter says Bob was wearing cowboy type pointy boots. Peter had done or said nothing to warrant this, and surprisingly Bob didn't apologise. After Bob kicked him in the eye, Peter tackled him to the floor and pinned him there, and Peter was larger and heavier than Bob. Peter then said he would let him get up, but he'd better not have any more problems with him. He says Bob got up and walked away, but then charged at him again, and he pushed him to the radiator and injured Peter's back. Peter again threw him to the ground and held him there, and again warned him before letting him up that he wouldn't be so kind if it happened again. So Bob then left the room and Kathy then indicated that Bob had a gun. It all sounds so like Bob though. He was unpredictable. He just flew off the handle. He was violent. So when asked about Kathy, he says Kathy seemed to have a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear, and Peter thought Bob had left the apartment, although he didn't see him leave. He didn't see Bob after that, and he believes Kathy called the police and an officer did come to the apartment. He didn't, I don't think he actually talked to them. I think Kathy did all the talking on that one. Peter did file civil proceedings. In other words, he sued him in civil court, although they say that was resolved, so whether he got a payout or not, I don't know. He is asked if he remembers telling a detective that Kathy told him that she had to sign joint tax returns fraudulently because Bob wanted to avoid paying taxes. He doesn't remember, but it has been officially recorded, and he believes the statement more than his own memory at the time. So in late January of 1982, he received a phone call from Kathy. He believes it was in the evening. He believes Kathy was calling him from Gilberta's, and the conversations were about her inquiry about the status of any lawsuits that were pending or going forward against Bob. And she asked Peter about the status of his civil, but it could be the criminal one. It gets a bit confusing against Bob, and he told her that it wasn't really a subject he could discuss with her. But we do eventually find out what happened, and the suit was dropped, and he can't remember if he told her that or not. He does recall, though, that Kathy was getting more and more aggravated because she wasn't getting all the answers she wanted. And he says, as the conversation went on, Kathy's speech was getting more rapid and her voice was getting a little more raised. She appeared to be very impatient with Peter diverting what she was saying and not being more direct. Peter actually took his own notes during and after this phone call, and one line of the note says that someone was listening on the line. He said he heard clicks that made him believe that someone else was listening. So the cross-examination. There was a third time when Peter was around Kathy. It was when Gilberta invited Peter to go with her to Kathy and Bob's apartment, and he didn't realise Gilberta was delivering cocaine. He says it did shock him at the time. Peter has said that he only spoke to Kathy on the phone twice, but phone records show that Kathy called Peter 3 times, which Peter has no recollection of. Peter is asked if he got offered money to participate in the Jinx, to which Peter says he got offered money to participate in a movie, which he thought was the Jinx, and was offered $5,000 to be interviewed for it, which he might have done if he'd been offered a lot more. Although ABC offered him money for some pictures of his black eye and to interview him, and they paid him $5,000 for a one-time use of his photographs. So there we go. We finally hear from the guy that Bob attacked twice. All very believable. I believe every single word of that happening. No matter what the defence say, it happened. It was Bob. Come on. So there we go. I'll be back with more in another video. So until then, bye for now.